the $78,000 conversation script. With perfect timing secured, Sarah stood at the threshold of the most critical 30 minutes of her professional life. All her research, documentation, and psychological preparation would be put to the test in this single conversation. Would she walk away with the $18,000 increase she deserved, or would she become another statistic? Someone who sensed their worth but couldn't translate it into actual dollars? The difference almost always comes down to the exact words you use when that office door closes. Tuesday morning arrived with Sarah's stomach in knots despite all her preparation. She'd rehearsed this conversation countless times, but sitting across from her boss Mark felt entirely different. The conference room seemed smaller somehow, the air a bit thinner. "Thanks for making time to meet with me today, Mark," Sarah began, her voice steadier than she expected. "Before we dive in, I want to emphasize how much I value being part of this team and contributing to our success over these past 3 years." This opening was strategic. By establishing her commitment up front, Sarah framed herself as a dedicated team member seeking fair value, not someone with one foot out the door using a competing offer as leverage. "You mentioned wanting to discuss your contributions," Mark replied, glancing at the value portfolio she'd sent ahead. "I've looked through this document, and I have to say it's impressively detailed." Rather than jumping straight to her request, Sarah took control of the narrative. "I'd like to walk you through some key highlights, if that's all right. As marketing landscapes change so quickly, I wanted to make sure I connected some dots between my initiatives and our department goals." For the next 10 minutes, Sarah methodically highlighted 5 of her 12 documented achievements, focusing on those with the clearest revenue connections. She knew these wins by heart, telling the story behind each metric and explaining her process. She discussed her email campaign restructuring, how she rebuilt their customer journey map and retargeted segments with customized content, driving increased open rates and substantial revenue growth. As she wrapped up her value summary, Sarah had established a critical foundation. Her portfolio demonstrated $215,000 in generated value through 12 key initiatives over the past year. What came next would be the pivotal moment in the negotiation, a technique professional negotiators consider among the most powerful in their arsenal. Sarah was about to deploy strategic silence, a moment of intentional quiet that works like a perfectly timed rest in music. Just as a musician knows that the pause between notes creates tension and anticipation, Sarah understood that silence after stating her value would create a response obligation that few managers can resist filling. "As you can see from the portfolio, I've generated $215,000 in value through these 12 key initiatives over the past year." Then, she went completely silent. For a full 5 seconds, Sarah said absolutely nothing. Mark shifted in his seat, feeling the weight of the quiet moment before finally responding. "These are impressive results, Sarah. Your contributions have definitely been valuable to the team, and I appreciate you documenting them so thoroughly." But as Sarah had anticipated, Mark didn't voluntarily bring up compensation. This is where most employees make a critical mistake. They either back down or apologetically mumble about hoping for a raise. Instead, Sarah used a value bridge, connecting documented value to compensation logically. "Thank you for recognizing that, Mark," Sarah replied. "Based on these contributions and my research on market rates for this position, I believe a salary adjustment to $78,000 would align with the value I'm bringing to the team." She delivered this with steady eye contact and even tone, then returned to strategic silence. Mark's eyebrows shot up. "That's quite a significant increase you're asking for, Sarah." Sarah nodded calmly. "I understand it represents a meaningful adjustment. When I analyzed both my contributions and current market rates for marketing managers with my specialized skills in campaign optimization and ROI measurement, the data consistently pointed to this range. I'd be happy to share more details about my research methodology if that would be helpful." Mark leaned back. "I appreciate the research, but I'm not sure our budget can accommodate such a large increase right now. We typically work with standard percentage adjustments." "I understand budget considerations are important," Sarah replied. "What I'm suggesting is aligning my compensation with the actual value I'm creating rather than focusing on percentage increases. When we consider that the $215,000 in value I've documented represents more than 3 times my current salary, the adjustment to $78,000 still provides the company with an excellent return on investment." Mark nodded, considering this perspective. He agreed to discuss it with HR and review their compensation bands, promising an answer by week's end. As they concluded, Mark asked why she compiled this information now. Avoiding potential defensiveness, Sarah explained she'd been tracking projects more carefully while researching industry benchmarks for career development, noticing the gap between market value and her current compensation. Walking back to her desk, her hands were still shaking slightly, but she felt immensely proud. Regardless of the outcome, she had clearly articulated her value without backing down. Step 6. Handling the budget objection like a pro. The budget objection, those dream-crushing words we all fear. Sarah was about to face it head-on as Mark's expression shifted from impressed to apologetic. "Sarah, I appreciate your work, but we simply don't have the budget for such a large increase." There it was, the classic shutdown that stops most negotiations dead in their tracks. Most people in this moment do one of two things. They either awkwardly accept defeat with a mumbled, "I understand," or they get defensive and argumentative, neither of which leads to success. But Sarah wasn't most people anymore. She had prepared specifically for this objection using the 3-part response framework I'd taught her. First, Sarah acknowledged Mark's concern with a calm nod. "I understand budget constraints are a reality, Mark. Every department has to work within financial limitations." She validated his perspective without accepting it as the final word, creating an opening to continue the conversation. In the second part of the framework, the value pivot, Sarah shifted from acknowledging the constraint to focusing on ROI. "When we look at the $215,000 in value I've created over the past year, the investment of $18,000 represents an 11x return for the company. That's actually a significant cost efficiency when viewed through that lens." This approach transforms the conversation from cost, triggering loss aversion in managers, to investment, activating their opportunity-seeking mindset. Mark's slight head tilt showed this reframing was working. For the third component, Sarah offered flexible alternatives. "If the full amount isn't possible immediately, I'm open to discussing a phased approach or performance-based increases. For instance, we could implement half now and the remainder tied to hitting specific targets in the next 2 quarters. This flexibility technique works because it gives managers options rather than a yes/no ultimatum. Research shows people feel more comfortable when given choices versus a single proposal. Mark considered her points but raised another barrier. "There are salary caps for your position that HR has established. Going outside those ranges would create internal equity issues. This is where most negotiations collapse, the policy wall. According to compensation research, over 70% of raise requests stall at this exact point. Companies hide behind policies because they seem immutable and impersonal. Sarah, however, was prepared. She used what I call the exceptional value bypass. "I understand policies exist to maintain consistency, Mark, but exceptions are often made for exceptional value. The metrics in my portfolio demonstrate performance well above standard expectations for this role." This statement acknowledges the policy while establishing legitimate grounds for exception. It directly challenges arbitrary compensation limits that HR departments often impose. When Mark remained hesitant, Sarah presented the replacement cost argument. "I've also researched that hiring and training someone new for this position would cost approximately 1.5 to 2 times my annual salary when factoring in recruitment, onboarding time, and productivity ramp-up. The adjustment I'm requesting actually represents significant savings compared to that scenario. This highlights the hidden costs of employee turnover, a pain point most managers understand intimately. Companies often focus on salary budgets while ignoring the massive expense of replacing valuable team members." Mark leaned back in his chair and sighed, a sign that Sarah's points were landing. "You've clearly done your homework, Sarah. I need some time to discuss this with HR and review our options. I'll need to get back to you on this." Most people feel anxious at this response, interpreting, "I'll get back to you" as rejection. Sarah instead used a professional closing response. "I appreciate you taking the time to consider this carefully, Mark. When do you think you'll have an answer? Would it be helpful if I provided any additional information to support your discussions with HR?" This response expresses gratitude, establishes a timeline expectation, and offers support for his next steps, maintaining partnership rather than creating an adversarial dynamic. Mark committed to getting back to her by the end of the week, giving Sarah a specific time frame rather than an open-ended promise. The most important takeaway from Sarah's approach is treating the budget objection as the beginning of a problem-solving discussion, not the end. The framework works across industries because it's grounded in fundamental business principles every manager understands: return on investment, value creation, and cost efficiency. This method is powerful because it provides specific language patterns and response techniques that address the actual barriers managers raise, rather than empty platitudes like be confident or know your worth. When your boss says, "We don't have the budget," they're really saying, "Convince me this is worth prioritizing in our limited budget." That's a challenge you can meet with proper preparation.